The phone vibrated on the glass table, and a shiver ran down Sofia's spine. Her eyes locked onto the illuminated screen, her heartbeat quickening as she read the message. Our meeting is set. Imperial Hotel. Presidential Suite. 10 p.m. The payment will be made before midnight. Alexander Carter. She swallowed hard. The money was already in her account. $2 million. Enough to change her life, to pay off her debts, to save her sister, to breathe without fear for the first time in years. But at what cost? Her trembling fingers slid over the thin fabric of her red dress, the only one she had that could blend into that world of luxury. Even dressed as a confident woman, she felt like an imposter. She had never done anything like this before. She had never imagined she would accept such an absurd proposal, but desperation has a way of turning even the unthinkable into the only option. The streets of New York glowed under the streetlights as the taxi moved smoothly down the avenue. Her mind was a mess. Should she turn back? Pretend none of this had ever happened? But then she remembered why she had agreed. She had no choice. The car rolled to a stop in front of the Imperial Hotel, one of the most luxurious in the city. Sofia took a deep breath before stepping out. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she crossed the opulent lobby, feeling the discreet glances of men and women who belonged to that world. She didn't. A security guard in a dark suit waited near the elevator. He didn't speak, only gave her a small nod, signaling for her to follow. Sofia obeyed, feeling her stomach twist into knots. The golden doors of the elevator slid shut, trapping her in silence. The numbers climbed slowly on the digital panel. 10, 20, 30, 40. The hallway on the top floor was eerily quiet. The security guard stopped in front of a set of double doors and opened one, stepping aside for her to enter. Sofia hesitated for a brief moment. It was too late to turn back. She stepped inside, and then she saw him. Alexander Carter. The air left her lungs. He stood by a glass table, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching her with an unreadable expression. Tall, imposing, with ice-blue eyes that looked straight through her. His black suit was perfectly tailored, contrasting with the shadow of his stubble, and every detail of his presence screamed power and danger. But it wasn't his appearance that sent a chill down her spine. It was the way he looked at her. He looked at her like he already knew her. Sofia's heart pounded against her ribs. She had never seen this man before. Had she? Alexander took a slow step forward, never breaking eye contact. The tension in the air was suffocating. You came. His voice was deep, low, carrying something she couldn't quite decipher. Sofia parted her lips to respond, but her throat was dry. She only nodded, trying to ignore the overwhelming feeling that something was very wrong. You, she began, but her voice failed her. Alexander Carter studied her, his gaze moving over every detail of her face, every slight movement she made, like he was trying to piece together a puzzle. And then, a faint smile appeared on the corner of his lips, a dangerous smile. Before we start, he stepped closer, closing the space between them until she could feel the warmth of his body. Why did you pretend not to know me? The floor seemed to disappear beneath her feet. Her heart pounded. Her mind crashed. What did he mean by that? She had never met this man before. Had she? The silence between them was suffocating. Alexander's question echoed in Sofia's mind like thunder. Why did you pretend not to know me? She tried to say something, but her mind was blank. Every fiber of her being screamed that something was wrong, that this man was playing with her. But his eyes didn't belong to a liar. I don't understand what you mean. Her voice was barely above a whisper, her throat dry as she swallowed hard. Alexander tilted his head slightly, studying her reaction. He took a slow step forward, and instinctively Sofia took one back. But there was nowhere to go. Interesting, he murmured, almost to himself, before bringing the glass of whiskey to his lips. So that's how you're going to play this? Sofia's heartbeat quickened. This wasn't a man who liked games. But she truly had no idea what he was talking about. He walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the illuminated city below. There's something strange about all this. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something unreadable. When I first saw you, I had the strangest feeling, something familiar, like we had met before. A shiver ran down Sofia's spine. That doesn't make sense, she finally managed to say. I've never seen you before. Alexander smirked slightly, but this time it wasn't amusement. It was doubt. I'm a very careful man, Sofia, he said smoothly. I don't make deals without knowing exactly who I'm dealing with. I made sure to learn everything about you, who you are, where you came from, your family. He turned to face her again, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach twist. But there's one curious thing about your story. Sofia's breath hitched. A detail? Alexander stepped closer again, and this time she had no space to move away. They were inches apart now. You disappeared for 3 years. His voice was barely a whisper. Her body froze. Her blood turned to ice. 3 years. 3 years erased from her life. No one ever talked about it. No one ever questioned it. Not even she dared to think about it. All she knew was that she had woken up in a hospital with no memory of that time. They told her it had been an accident, that her mind had chosen to forget. But now this man, this stranger, was bringing it back. What happened to you in those 3 years, Sofia? Alexander's voice was firm, but beneath it, there was something else, something darker. Sofia opened her mouth, but no answer came. Her heartbeat was erratic. Her vision began to blur. She tried to move away, but her legs failed her. The ground seemed to tilt. The air became thick. I don't know, she whispered, her head throbbing. Alexander caught her by the arm before she collapsed. His grip was firm, steady, grounding. But Sofia's mind was spinning, drowning in a single terrifying thought. If he was right, what else had they hidden from her? Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Flashes of something long buried began surfacing. Shadows, distant voices, a name whispered in the dark. And then a scene, a stormy night, a door slamming open violently, and a man shouting her name. Sofia gasped, sucking in a sharp breath as her wide eyes met Alexander's once again. And this time, she felt it, pure fear settling deep inside her, because the voice in her memory was his. Sofia's breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room felt too small, the air too thick. Alexander Carter's words echoed in her mind, bouncing off the walls of her sanity like a cruel game. You disappeared for 3 years. Her fingers clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms as if the pain could ground her. 3 years. A gap in her life that she never questioned because the mere thought of it made her stomach twist. She had accepted what they told her, that there had been an accident, that her memories were lost due to trauma, that she should stop trying to remember. But now, standing face to face with this man, she realized something chilling. Someone didn't want her to remember. Alexander was watching her, his piercing blue eyes scanning every micro-expression, every nervous twitch of her lips. He wasn't just curious, he was testing her. You don't remember anything, do you? His voice was low, almost too calm, as if he already knew the answer. Sofia swallowed hard, shaking her head. I woke up in a hospital. That's all I know. No one ever told me what happened before that. Alexander's jaw tightened. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, eyes never leaving hers. Interesting. That single word sent a chill down her spine. Interesting, she repeated, her voice sharper than she intended. What's so interesting about a woman with missing memories? Alexander stepped closer, and this time she didn't step back. Because, Sofia, he lowered his voice, making each word drip with intensity. I was looking for you, and no one could find you. Her heart stopped. A ringing filled her ears. What? 3 years ago, you vanished without a trace. No records, no sightings, no explanations. And then, out of nowhere, you show up again, living an ordinary life, as if nothing ever happened. Her throat went dry. Why were you looking for me? Alexander's expression darkened, as if debating whether to tell her the truth. And then he said something that made her blood turn to ice. Because, Sofia, before you disappeared, you were mine. The world tilted. Sofia stumbled backward, her back hitting the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. Her mind screamed no, but something deep inside her, something instinctive primal, told her he wasn't lying. Before she could react, a sharp pain shot through her head. Flashes of memories burst into her mind like shattered glass. A stormy night, running down a hallway, a door slamming shut, his voice calling her name, the scent of his cologne, the feeling of his hands gripping her waist. A kiss, promise, a betrayal. Sofia gasped, clutching her head as the fragments of her past clawed their way back into her consciousness. Alexander took another step forward, reaching for her, but she flinched. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. It didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. She had never met this man. Had she? Her pulse thundered in her ears as she looked up at him, fear and confusion colliding inside her. "Tell me, Sofia." Alexander's voice was lower now, more dangerous. "What exactly did they make you forget?" Sofia opened her mouth, but no words came out, because for the first time since waking up in that hospital 3 years ago, she was truly terrified of what she might remember. Sofia's breath caught in her throat, her pulse hammering as Alexander's words echoed in her mind. "Before you disappeared, you were mine." It wasn't possible. Couldn't be. Her life had been simple, at least that's what she had always believed. But now, with every passing second in that suite, doubt seeped into her like poison. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "You're lying," she whispered, though the words tasted like uncertainty. Alexander didn't flinch. His piercing blue eyes held her captive, a knowing smirk forming at the corner of his lips. "Am I?" She wanted to turn away, to dismiss everything he was saying. But the moment she did, the flashes returned. Rain, a long hallway, the sound of footsteps chasing her, his voice calling her name. The images were brief, fragmented, but they left a sinking feeling in her stomach. "I don't remember you," she said, almost pleading, as if hoping that saying it out loud would make it true. "That's the problem, Sofia." Alexander stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Someone made sure you wouldn't." A chill ran down her spine. She shook her head. "That doesn't make any sense. Why would someone erase my memories?" He exhaled sharply, rubbing his jaw. "You disappeared for 3 years. No records, no explanations. Then suddenly you reappear, living a normal life, as if nothing happened. But I looked for you, and no one could find you." Her chest tightened. The air felt thinner. "Why were you looking for me?" For the first time that night, he hesitated. His expression darkened, his jaw clenching as if choosing his words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "Because you knew something. Something dangerous." The room fell into silence. Sofia felt the weight of his words press against her ribs, squeezing the air from her lungs. Her hands trembled at her sides. "That's ridiculous," she managed, but her voice wavered. Alexander reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thin black folder, tossing it onto the table. It slid across the glass, stopping just inches from her hands. "Then explain this." She hesitated. Everything inside her screamed not to open it, but she had to know. Slowly, she reached for the folder, fingers trembling as she flipped it open. Her heart stopped. A photo. Her and Alexander, not just standing together, kissing. Sofia's fingers tightened around the edges of the paper as her world tilted. In the picture, she looked different. Her hair slightly shorter, her eyes filled with something she couldn't recognize anymore. And Alexander. He wasn't the cold, controlled man standing in front of her now. In that photo, he held her like she meant something, like she was his. Her breathing grew uneven as a sharp pain shot through her skull. And then the memories came. Laughter in the dark, whispers of secrets, a hidden room, footsteps, a door slamming, a scream, blood on her hands, promise to never speak of it again. She gasped, clutching her head, her vision blurring. The pain was unbearable, like her mind was being forced open against her will. She staggered backward, almost falling, and in an instant, Alexander was there, gripping her shoulders. "Sofia, what is it?" His voice was urgent, demanding. She looked up at him, fear flashing in her eyes. Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out. Someone else was there that night. Alexander's entire body tensed. His grip on her tightened. "Who?" She opened her mouth. The name was right there on the tip of her tongue. And then everything went black. Darkness swallowed her whole. Sofia drifted between reality and oblivion, trapped in a space where time didn't exist. Distant echoes of voices whispered around her, blurred images flashing behind her closed eyelids, faces she couldn't recognize, shadows moving in the dark, a feeling of being watched. Then, suddenly, a sharp gasp ripped through her chest as she jolted awake. Her body tensed as she found herself lying on a plush bed, silky sheets beneath her, the scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Alexander. She wasn't alone. Her vision adjusted, and she saw him standing near the window, his broad shoulders illuminated by the city lights. He had taken off his suit jacket, his white dress shirt slightly unbuttoned, his expression unreadable as he turned to face her. "You passed out," he said simply, his voice calm but laced with something deeper. Concern, frustration, maybe even fear. What the hell happened? Sofia pressed a hand to her temple, the remnants of the memory still clawing at her mind. She had remembered something. Someone else had been there that night. But the moment she tried to say the name, everything had gone black. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I saw something, a memory. But when I tried to say the name, it just disappeared." Alexander's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, slowly, cautiously, like he was approaching something fragile or something dangerous. "What did you remember?" Sofia hesitated. Could she trust him? Everything inside her screamed that he wasn't just some stranger. The photo, the flashes of their past together, the way her body reacted to his presence. It all pointed to one truth. They had history, and yet she had no idea what kind. She took a shaky breath. "It was raining. I was running. Someone was chasing me. I remember a door slamming shut, a scream." Her voice broke as another sharp pain shot through her skull. She winced, pressing her fingers to her temple. And then blood. On my hands. Alexander's expression remained unreadable, but she noticed the way his jaw clenched, the slight shift in his posture. He knew something. Sofia forced herself to meet his gaze. "Tell me the truth. Who am I to you?" For a moment he said nothing. The weight of his silence pressed against her, suffocating. Then, finally, he exhaled, his voice lower than before. "You weren't just someone I knew, Sofia." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of unease. "You were everything." Her heart twisted at the words. Everything. She wanted to believe him, but how could she, when she didn't even know who she was anymore? Sofia's hands trembled as she pushed herself upright. "Then why did I disappear? Why did someone erase me?" Alexander didn't respond right away. He walked to the nightstand, opened a drawer, and pulled out something small, something metallic. When he turned back to her, he held it out in his palm. A ring. Simple, elegant. A delicate gold band with a small engraved inscription on the inside. "To my forever." Sofia's breath caught. Her fingers hovered over it, afraid to touch it. "What is this?" His eyes locked onto hers. "It was yours." The room spun. Sofia felt her pulse pounding against her ribs, her mind scrambling to make sense of it all. She had been engaged. To him. Her head shook instinctively. No, that's impossible." Alexander's gaze darkened, his patience thinning. "Why would I lie to you?" Her chest tightened. She didn't have an answer. She didn't know what was real anymore. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, frustration clawing at her throat. "Then tell me what happened. Why don't I remember you? Why did I disappear?" Alexander hesitated again. It was subtle, but Sofia saw it. There was something he wasn't telling her. And then, the words left his lips like a bullet. Because you ran from me. Sofia froze. Her pulse roared in her ears. She had left him. Her mind rejected it, but her body, her instincts, reacted differently. A shiver ran down her spine, and suddenly, another fragmented memory surfaced. She saw herself standing in front of a mirror, tears running down her face, her hands trembling as she took off that very ring. A voice in the distance. Asterisk, asterisk, his voice. Asterisk, asterisk, calling her name. The feeling of panic, of desperation, as she grabbed a bag and rushed out into the night. She had run. But why? Sofia's breathing turned shallow as she looked at him, at the man she apparently left behind. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Alexander stepped closer, his voice lower now. So tell me, Sofia, what were you running from? Her pulse spiked. She didn't know, but something told her she was about to find out. Sofia's pulse thundered in her ears. She had run from him. The thought sent a chill through her bones, but no matter how hard she tried to grasp onto the memories, they remained just out of reach, like a dream slipping through her fingers. Her breathing was shallow as she stared at the ring in Alexander's hand. To my forever. Those words should have meant something, but they didn't, and that terrified her. I don't understand, she whispered, barely hearing her own voice. If we were engaged, if I was everything to you, then why did I leave? Alexander's jaw tightened. His expression was unreadable, his fingers closing around the ring as if holding onto something already lost. That's what I need you to remember. His words felt heavier than they should have, like a challenge or a warning. Sofia's mind raced. If she had left, if someone had erased her memories, then something terrible must have happened. Something she wasn't supposed to know. Tell me what you know, she demanded, her voice steadier now. Alexander exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a decision, to tell the truth or to protect her from it. I know that the night you disappeared, you were afraid, he finally said. You called me. You told me you had discovered something dangerous, something that put you in danger. You begged me to meet you. Sofia's throat tightened. And did you? A flicker of something dark passed through his expression. I tried, but when I got there, you were gone. The words hit her harder than they should have. Felt too real, too familiar. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force the memories back, but it was like looking through shattered glass. Nothing fit together. Gone, she murmured. Like I just vanished? Alexander nodded. No records, no traces. It was like you had never existed. Sofia felt a chill crawl up her spine. Someone had erased her, wiped away 3 years of her life. But why? And who had the power to do something like that? Her fingers gripped the sheets beneath her, her nails digging into the fabric. There was someone else there that night, she whispered. I remember that much. Alexander's body tensed. Who? Sofia's lips parted, but the moment she tried to say the name, the pain struck. A sharp, searing agony shot through her skull, so intense it knocked the air from her lungs. She gasped, clutching her head, her vision blurring. It was happening again. Sofia! Alexander's voice was distant, muffled, like she was underwater. Then suddenly a flash. A dark alley. The sound of footsteps behind her. A car pulling up. Hands grabbing her. A voice. Low. Familiar. Dangerous. Sofia, run. The words exploded in her mind like a gunshot. And suddenly, she was back in the room, gasping for air. Her entire body was shaking. Alexander was kneeling in front of her now, his hands gripping her arms. What did you see? Sofia's chest rose and fell rapidly. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I wasn't running from you, she whispered. I was running from someone else. Alexander's grip tightened slightly. Who? Sofia tried to speak, but the name was still buried deep, locked away. But now she knew one thing for certain. Someone had taken her. Someone had erased her memories. And now, they knew she was remembering. Her heart pounded as the realization set in. She wasn't safe. She looked at Alexander, fear flickering behind her eyes. Whoever did this to me, They're still out there. Alexander's expression turned deadly. And I swear to you, Sofia, we're going to find them. But deep down, Sofia felt it. Whoever they were already watching. Sofia's body was still trembling as the weight of her own words settled in. She wasn't running from Alexander. She was running from someone else. And now, whoever had erased her past knew she was remembering. The air between them was heavy, charged with something unspoken. Alexander's grip on her arms loosened slightly, but his eyes remained locked onto hers, searching for something. Answers, certainty, maybe even fear. We need to figure out who was after you, he said. His voice controlled but edged with something darker. And why? Sofia exhaled shakily, nodding. She wanted to remember, but every attempt sent sharp pain through her skull, like her mind was fighting to keep the truth buried. But why? Alexander stood abruptly and walked to the bar, pouring himself a drink. His movements were tense, calculated. I should have found you sooner, he muttered, almost to himself. I should have never let you disappear. Sofia's heart twisted at the raw frustration in his tone. You looked for me? His jaw clenched as he turned to face her. For years, something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. She had been gone for 3 years erased from her life, from his. She rubbed her temples, trying to push through the fog in her mind. I keep seeing flashes. A dark alley, a car, someone telling me to run. Her voice wavered. I think I was taken. Alexander's entire body tensed. Taken? She nodded. But I don't know by who. He set his drink down and strode back toward her. Then we need to find out. His voice was steady, but she could see the storm brewing behind his eyes. Whoever had done this to her wasn't just a threat to her. They were a threat to him, too. A sudden thought struck her, and she swallowed hard. What if I was taken because of you? Alexander stilled. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. If I knew something dangerous, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, and I was with you, maybe whatever I found out was connected to you. His expression darkened, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, without a word, he turned, grabbed his phone, and dialed a number. Sofia watched as his face hardened, his posture rigid. It's me. I need everything you can find on Sofia Ramirez's disappearance 3 years ago. Every detail. A pause. No, I don't care how classified it is. Get it? He hung up and turned back to her, his expression unreadable. I have people who can dig deeper than the police ever could, he explained. If there's something to find, we'll find it. Sofia nodded slowly, a mix of relief and unease settling in her stomach. But just as she was about to speak, her phone buzzed. She froze. The number was unknown. A cold dread crept over her skin as she hesitated, then slowly picked up. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a voice, distorted, mechanical. You should have stayed in the dark, Sofia. Her breath caught. The line went dead. The phone slipped from her fingers. Alexander was at her side in an instant. What happened? She looked up at him, her hands shaking. They know I'm remembering. His jaw tightened, his expression turning lethal. Then we don't have much time. Sofia swallowed the lump in her throat, realizing the horrifying truth. She had spent years trying to remember. Now, someone would do anything to make sure she forgot. Forever. Sofia's body remained frozen, her breath shallow, as the weight of the distorted voice on the phone settled over her like a heavy fog. You should have stayed in the dark, Sofia. The words repeated in her mind, each syllable laced with an unspoken threat. Whoever had erased her past knew she was remembering, and now they wanted to stop her. Her fingers were ice cold as she lowered the phone onto the bed, staring at it like it might explode. The room felt suddenly smaller, suffocating, the walls pressing in on her. Alexander snatched the phone and checked the number, his jaw tightening when he saw there was no caller ID, no trace left behind. He cursed under his breath, his grip tightening around the device before he tossed it onto the table. This changes everything, he muttered, his voice controlled but laced with frustration. Sofia's throat was dry. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like eyes were watching her from every shadow. They're watching me. They've probably been watching since the moment you stepped back into my life. Alexander's words were sharp, calculated, but his expression revealed something deeper. Anger. It wasn't just frustration. It was rage, controlled but simmering beneath the surface. Sofia swallowed, her heart racing. What do they want from me? Alexander met her gaze, his voice dangerously calm. To make sure you never remember. The weight of his words made her knees weak. She had spent years trying to figure out who she was, what had happened to her, and now that she was on the verge of the truth, someone wanted to erase her all over again. A sudden knock at the door made her flinch. Alexander's entire body tensed, his movements sharp as he reached into a drawer and pulled out a gun. He signaled for her to stay back, his posture shifting into something more dangerous, more predatory. The knock came again, louder this time. Sofia barely breathed as Alexander moved to the door, his grip firm around the gun. He didn't open it right away. Who is it? His voice was low, cold. A pause. Then, a deep voice answered from the other side. Mr. Carter, we need to talk. Sofia's heart pounded. Who was he? Alexander's hand never wavered as he cracked the door open just enough to see. A tall man in a dark suit stood outside, his posture stiff, unreadable. Two other men flanked him, standing a few feet back, silent, watching. Something wasn't right. Alexander didn't budge. About what? The man's gaze flicked to Sofia, and for a second, just a second, she saw something in his eyes. Recognition. Fear. You already know, the man said. Let us in. Alexander's grip on the gun tightened. No. The man exhaled, glancing down the hallway, as if checking for something or someone. Then he lowered his voice. You don't have time for this, Carter. They're coming. Sofia felt the chill of those words run down her spine. Alexander's expression didn't change, but his knuckles turned white around the gun. Who? The man hesitated, then looked directly at Sofia. The people who took her before. The ones who made her disappear. They know she's remembering, and they won't let it happen. A deep, primal fear settled in her chest. Alexander's voice was controlled, but there was something dangerous in it. What do they want? The man's eyes darkened. To finish what they started. The room seemed to tilt. The air grew thin. They weren't just trying to keep her quiet. They wanted her gone. Alexander slammed the door shut and locked it, his movements swift, precise. He was already dialing a number before Sofia could even process what was happening. We're leaving, he said, his voice clipped, urgent. Sofia's pulse was racing. Where? Somewhere they can't find you. He turned away, gripping the phone. Get the jet ready. We're moving. Her mind was spinning, running, again. But this time, it wasn't about escaping a memory. It was about staying alive. Just as she took a shaky breath, ready to ask what was next, the first gunshot rang out. Sofia's entire body jerked as the sound echoed through the walls. The sharp crack of it sent a shockwave through her chest. Alexander moved instantly, pushing her back against the wall, shielding her with his body. Another shot, and then footsteps, fast, heavy, coming straight toward them. They weren't knocking anymore. They were coming in. Alexander's hand found hers, gripping it tight. His voice was low, urgent. Whatever happens, don't stop running. Sofia barely had time to nod before the door burst open, and the night swallowed them whole. The door burst open with a violent crack, and before Sofia could even process what was happening, Alexander was already pulling her through the suite. The hallway lights flickered as the sound of footsteps pounded behind them. They were coming fast. Move, Alexander commanded, his grip on her wrist firm but not painful. He wasn't taking any chances. Neither could she. Sofia's breath came in short, sharp gasps as they reached the emergency stairwell. Alexander shoved the door open, and they rushed inside just as another gunshot echoed behind them. She flinched. Too close. Way too close. Alexander didn't hesitate, pulling her down the stairs at a breakneck pace. They won't stop, he said between breaths. They need you gone. Sofia's mind raced. Why? Why are they so desperate to erase me? Alexander glanced back, his expression grim. Because you're the only loose end left. Her stomach twisted at the words, but there was no time to ask more. The sound of doors slamming open above them sent a fresh wave of panic through her veins. They reached the parking garage, the dim yellow lights flickering overhead. Alexander pulled a key fob from his pocket, pressing it once. A sleek black car roared to life a few feet away. Get in, he ordered, yanking the passenger door open. Sofia barely had time to buckle in before Alexander slammed his door shut and hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as they sped toward the exit. In the rearview mirror, shadows moved. The men in black suits had followed them, and they were armed. A sharp crack shattered the back window as the first bullet hit. Sofia ducked instinctively, her heart hammering. Alexander cursed under his breath, weaving the car through the narrow streets of downtown New York. We won't make it to the jet, he muttered. They'll be waiting. Sofia swallowed hard. Then where do we go? He didn't answer immediately. His grip tightened around the steering wheel, his jaw clenching as if debating whether to say what was on his mind. Then finally, we go to the only person who can tell us the truth. Sofia turned to him, confusion flickering across her face. Who? Alexander's eyes darkened. The man who took you. Her blood ran cold. A part of her wanted to refuse, to say it was too dangerous. But deep down, she knew they had no choice. Whoever had orchestrated her disappearance, whoever had erased her memories, was still controlling the game. And if they didn't find him first, he would find them. The city blurred past them as Alexander drove through back streets and alleyways, avoiding main roads. Sofia felt the weight of everything pressing against her chest. The fear, the adrenaline, the pieces of a past she couldn't fully grasp. Then, suddenly, another flash of memory hit her. A dimly lit room, a man's voice whispering, "You need to forget. It's the only way." Her breath caught. She knew that voice. Alexander noticed her reaction immediately. Sofia? She turned to him, her hands shaking. I think I remember him." Alexander's grip on the wheel tightened. "Who is he?" Sofia tried to speak the name, but once again it wouldn't come. Her head throbbed, the familiar pain searing through her skull like a warning, like a lock being forced shut. She gasped, gripping her temples. "I don't know, but he wanted me to forget something. Something important." Alexander didn't respond right away. His jaw tensed, his mind already working 100 steps ahead. "Then we make him tell us." Sofia exhaled shakily. "And if he won't?" Alexander's gaze met hers, cold and unwavering. "Then I'll make him." A shiver ran down her spine, because for the first time since waking up in that hospital 3 years ago, Sofia realized this wasn't just about remembering anymore. This was about surviving. And no matter what happened next, someone wasn't making it out of this alive. The car screeched to a halt in front of an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Rain drizzled against the windshield, sliding down in uneven streams as Sofia stared at the darkened building. Her pulse thundered in her ears. This was it, the place where the truth waited for her, where the missing pieces of her past would finally come together. But some part of her, deep in her gut, knew that whatever she was about to learn would change everything. Alexander gripped the wheel tightly, his jaw clenched, his breathing controlled but heavy with tension. He turned to her, his blue eyes dark with warning. "Once we go in, there's no turning back." Sofia swallowed, her fingers trembling as she unbuckled her seatbelt. "I need to know." Without another word, Alexander stepped out first, scanning the area before opening her door. The rain was colder than she expected, soaking into her skin as they moved toward the entrance. The rusted metal door groaned as Alexander pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit room with a single flickering bulb overhead. The air smelled of dust and damp wood, a forgotten place filled with secrets never meant to be uncovered. And then, she saw him. A man sat calmly in the center of the room, legs crossed, his hands resting on the arms of a weathered wooden chair, as if he had been waiting for them. His face was familiar, not from her conscious memory, but from the flashes, the nightmares, the pieces of a past she had been forced to forget. Her breath hitched. This was him, the man who took her, the man who erased her. Alexander stepped forward, his shoulders squared, his voice dangerously quiet. "You know why we're here?" The man tilted his head slightly, a slow smile curling on his lips. "Of course." His voice was smooth, eerily calm, as if none of this surprised him. "You want the truth." Sofia's heart pounded. She clenched her fists, forcing herself to take a step forward. "Why did you erase me?" The man studied her for a moment, then leaned forward, his dark eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Because, Sofia, you weren't supposed to survive that night." A shudder ripped through her. Her breath came fast, her stomach twisting violently as the words sank in. She was supposed to die. Alexander's hand twitched near his gun, his body tense, ready to act. But the man only smiled, shaking his head slowly. "Killing me won't change the past." And deep down, she knows that. Sofia's hands trembled as a fresh wave of memories slammed into her. A hidden room, an argument, a flash drive in her hands. Fear, panic, the feeling of running for her life. She gasped, pressing a hand to her temple as her vision blurred for a moment. The memories were coming too fast, too strong. I had proof of something." The man nodded, his expression almost amused. "And you were going to expose it. That's why we had to make you disappear." Sofia felt the air squeeze from her lungs. She turned to Alexander, her voice barely a whisper. "What did I find?" Alexander didn't look at her. His jaw was locked, his eyes fixed on the man in the chair. "Tell her." The man exhaled, like someone revealing the final move in a game already lost. "Everything. The money laundering, the government ties, the names of people who would rather kill than be exposed." The words sent a jolt of terror through her. That's why they erased her. That's why she ran. And then, like a key finally turning in a locked door, the last memory clicked into place. A voice, a whisper in the dark. "You need to forget. It's the only way." And then her own voice, weak but certain. "Not if I disappear first." The realization crashed over her like a wave, knocking the breath from her chest. She had chosen this. She had let them take her memories because it was the only way to survive. She staggered back, her mind spinning. I let them erase me." The man nodded. "Because if you remembered, you'd never be safe." Silence stretched between them. Sofia felt her entire world tilting, her sense of self shattering under the weight of the truth. She had sacrificed everything to survive, and now remembering might cost her everything again. Then suddenly Alexander moved. A single gunshot rang out. The man slumped forward, blood blooming across his chest. His last words left his lips in a whisper. "Now you'll never know everything." Sofia's breath hitched. The room spun. The finality of it hit her like a punch to the gut. Alexander lowered the gun, his face unreadable. "It's over," he said. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. Because now that she remembered, they would never stop coming. And this time, there would be no forgetting. What would you do if you were in Sofia's place? Did she make the right choice by remembering? Or was she safer in the dark? Let me know in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this suspenseful story full of twists and turns, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. There's so much more coming.